Yeah. Okay. But okay. All right. So maybe you can check it out. So basically, yeah. And there's a very good story I want to tell you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank God. Wow. Full house par excellence.
Any chance you could turn the camera around so I can see who's there? I'm in Zoom. I want to know who's in the room.
Right here.
Oh, wow.
Say shalom.
Amazing. That's
Okay.
amazing.
Is this so the people that are joining via Zoom know that I'm not talking to the wall? There's a fellow that I know in New York that sometimes he would give classes in a synagogue, and not always was it so well attended, but there was always a Zoom on him. It was before Zoom, it was like live broadcast. And what he would do was he would always, at the beginning, he would say, "No need to push, there's still room in the back." And then one time the screen turned around, there was two people sitting there like this. Like, no doubt there's no room in the back. Today's class is
You love to fib.
That's right. Today's class, discussion, conversation, really just heads up. It could take the whole night to discuss this. We're going to minimize it to try to keep it within an hour. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts, debates, discussions, concerns, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot of interesting things. Anna Marie. It's called The Survival of a Nation, and we're delving into today. We're going to be speaking about Israel, and I don't like to use the term, but its right to exist. And next week we're going to speak about, which is very much tied to the land of Israel, is anti-Semitism, understanding and outsmarting anti-Semitism. The following week we're going to touch upon from oi to joy, which is even though we're going through a stressful time, we want to reflect on things in the right way and bring about a positive perspective. Before I begin, I must say that today's classes are sponsored in part by, number one, Gam Zoom Latova. My dear friend at the Gam Zoom Latova, Akiva Bolter, as Rabbi Akiva, is the one behind it all. He does Zoom events, and he puts these things on. He has a platform for many Torah classes, Gam Zoom Latova, and .com. And if you want more information about booking, you can reach out to me, as well as Benjamin Monuments has sponsored in the past in the summer. And again, they've sponsored, if there's more chairs, could you get one more chair there? White chairs. Right behind the door. Mike. Thanks. Benjamin Monuments as well. They've co-sponsored this class. As well, tonight is a yard site. Tonight is the anniversary of the passing of a mother of one of our dear participants. Her name is Chana Bas Simon. So probably Chana Bat Shimon, Chana Bat Simon. And it's her yard site. What number yard site? What year? How many years? When did she pass away?
2005.
2005. So it's her 19th. Okay, it's going into the 20th year. It's a very special year, and it should be of blessings, l'chaim, for the neshama of Chana Bat Simon. Should have aliyah, her soul should ascend and have much pleasure and nachas from you and from all of us who are studying Torah in her merit. L'chaim. As well, tonight, the l'chaim, first of all, if you're into the Japanese sushi and Japanese l'chaim, thank you, Richard. But the other bottle of l'chaim and the ice and the Torah class is also co-sponsored by Gad and his wife Yael in memory of his father-in-law. His father-in-law today is 11 months from when he passed away. Remember, if you were by the class in the summer, you study that in 11 months, the Kaddish prayer is finished, because in 11th month, a Jewish soul is guaranteed to be in heaven, in Gan Eden. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Even the worst person in the world, which obviously his father wasn't, God forbid, but every single Jew is entered into Gan Eden, to paradise in 11 months. So today was the 11th month when Kaddish completed, and his name was Yosef ben Luna. And so l'chaim for Yosef ben Luna, and our learning Torah and all the brachot that we make. If we didn't make a shahakol yet, we can make a shahakol. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shahakol niyah bidvaro. That should be in loving memory of him.
I
Yes.
forgot my glasses. I gotta get my glasses.
Sorry to hear. What's the name?
Question came up of how long does it take Kaddish for a wife?
Any person needs 11 months of Kaddish said for them. Mourning period works differently by relatives. So, for example, there's a mourning period of a year for a parent, and there's a mourning period for 1 month for a spouse or a sibling. So he only needs to mourn, like mourners don't listen to live music throughout the year, or refrain from like taking haircuts very often. They would only do it when they need, like different types of things that they refrain from. A child, God forbid, who loses a parent, they practice that for a full year, for 11 months. And a person who, God forbid, loses a spouse or a sibling, it's only 1 month. Kaddish is for all 11 months. So we're going to jump right in to survival of a nation. And this course, got to be honest, that most of these courses I haven't created myself. That would take me many, 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 many months. And not that smart. No, I know a lot of the sources, but not to that degree. There is a Jewish Learning Institute in New York. And what they do is they provide, and they create, they're a research team, they're independent. It's not like Chabad International supplies it. It's a independent company, and they work on researching and creating beautiful curriculums. And so I'm able to purchase these curriculums from them. Takes a lot of back studying to go to the sources, but it's very clear and easy to study from. So this course was actually made a number of years ago when it was 50 years from the 6-Day War. However, certain courses don't get old. And even though it was a timely course that was made, it's 50 years from 6-Day War, what stayed, what changed. Fortunately and unfortunately, a lot of these elements that are addressed, every single element is very, very clear and very much in our face. And as we begin, so you open up the first page, right in the beginning, and if we go around and read a little bit. It is a much larger booklet. Also, printer printed it like huge. So if anyone has reading glasses, you probably don't need it this time. And if you do, don't worry. What we usually do is we go around, everyone would read a little bit. We are going to do a little bit more skipping this time, but it's powerful, it's important, and I hope, and I could almost guarantee you that you're going to walk away tonight with a lot of your questions answered and feeling a lot more comfortable and confident in being Jewish and in having a part in Israel. So the question in the front, and I'm going to ask Eitan, if you could begin. Lesson number 1, right at the cover page, it asks a scary but very relevant question. And if you could read that intro to our discussion tonight.
People of the land, the Jewish claim to Israel. The 1967 conflict resulted from the argument espoused by Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser and most leaders in the Arab world that Israel's existence was illegitimate. Having been founded on stolen Arab territory, what is Israel's response to this argument? What is her right to exist as a Jewish state in the heart of the Middle East? And what is the justification for associating Judaism, an ethereal religion of beliefs and ideas, with a specific territory?
They're all great questions, and these are questions, especially now, that we may be confronted with. And so some of these discussions might leave you excited or maybe partially emotionally charged by the thought or by the counter arguments. Let's hold it for a moment and let's try to listen in and hear all the sides, and we'll have full clarity. The question that is begged is, first of all, what does Jewish life, what is Israel, where does Israel hold a place in Jewish life? Meaning, how essential is Israel with being Jewish? Is Israel and being Jewish one and the same? Right? The famous argument is anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and people want to say not. We're going to see why, if it is or isn't. The second thing that we're going to address, I'm going to leave you with some cliffhangers. That's right. The next thing is, why do we need a homeland? You say Israel is our homeland. Am Yisrael Chai. Everyone has a Star of David, and we're all talking about Israel. Why? And finally, is what's our claim? So, what makes Israel our homeland, and why do we own it? Let's find out. So, there's a term as we begin. I just want to peek into it as we go on. There's a term, Libi Bamizrach. Libi Bamizrach literally means my heart is in the east. Throughout, we want to touch upon first where Israel comes into Jewish life. Israel and Jewish life is inseparable. Any person who is Jewish and experienced any part of the Jewish life cycle or any Jewish holiday is bound to run into Israel. For some examples, by a wedding, we break, the famous part where everyone screams out Mazel Tov is when the glass is stepped on. Does anyone know why we step on the glass? To remember that even though we're having a beautiful celebration of a marriage, we still should remember that our holy land of Israel and the temple in Jerusalem lie in ruins. So even in the happiest of times, we're remembering Israel. It's the yard site and the end of Kaddish for a number of people. When someone passes away and there are mourners and they sit on a low chair, the way that we comfort people, the words that are said, there's a saying that you're supposed to say. It's not a blessing. It's just a saying that people use to comfort people. And it is, in Hebrew, it's Hamakom Yenachem Etchem Betoch Shar Avelei Tzion V'Yerushalayim, which in English translates, may God comfort you amongst the mourners of Jerusalem and Zion. So again, when someone passes away, instead of saying, may you be comforted with all your cousins and your brothers and sisters, we say all the mourners of Jerusalem and Zion. At the end of the Seder, what do we shout out? What does every kid die to hear finally? L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem. Again, it's the way that we end off a Seder. It's the way that we end off Yom Kippur. We sound the shofar, and finally, again, not kids, but adults are like, yes, the bagels. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. We got it. That's our battle cry. So we see that in Judaism, Israel is inseparable from our religion, from our practice. And it comes up a lot. We're going to see why it's really inseparable, but it comes up definitely traditionally a lot. Another important thing is, and what we realize is, does anyone know why this Aron, the ark right behind me where the Torahs are kept, which we don't yet have a Torah, but we have a place to keep the Torahs and we borrow Torahs from people when we need them. Why is it on this wall and not on that wall, or on that wall, or on that wall? Why are we facing east? The sun rises that way, so we want to see the sun. We want to face Jerusalem. That's right. We face Jerusalem. Now, this facing Jerusalem didn't start, when people migrated to Canada and like, oh, I miss Israel. We should face Israel when we pray. Muslims actually face Mecca, but they, as many things, or I should say as everything, where do they get the great idea from? Jewish people. We started facing Israel many, many centuries before Islam was created. If you look in text 1, we're going to see one of the earliest places that we see that when praying, we face Jerusalem. And this is from the text of Daniel. Yes, it was Daniel, but that's not me. Yeah, I teach 7th grade. So some people say, oh, you're like Daniel in the lion's den. I said, yeah, sometimes. But in the book of Daniel, it speaks about that Daniel was a minister and an advisor in the cabinet of Nebuchadnezzar, not Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon. And he knew that, Daniel was a prophet and a wise person, and he took him as an advisor. And he was a loyal advisor, even though the guy wasn't the nicest person, let's put it mildly, but he took him as an advisor, and he was a very loyal advisor. The other ministers, surprisingly enough, were not happy with a Jew in such a high, place in the government. And that's when they slandered, and they said, he doesn't pray to your God, and therefore you should throw him into the fiery furnace, which is the famous story, not the fiery furnace, excuse me, into the lion's den. It's the famous story when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, and an angel came and closed the mouth of the lion, and he was safe, miraculously. But Daniel, being a Jew, he prayed, and he wasn't allowed to pray to God when other people were pagan and they were praying to their bricks and mortar and whatever else. So what did he do? So text number 1, Roberto, please. Text number 1, you see it. This is from the book of Daniel in the Tanakh, in the scriptures.
Before learning that the decree had been written, Daniel went to his home, where in the upstairs room there were windows open facing Jerusalem. 3 times a day he kneeled and prayed and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done it beforehand.
So just because there was a decree now, and they were very careful that no one should be worshiping any other god besides for their pagan idols, that didn't deter Daniel. And Daniel, where did he go? He went home to pray. He wasn't going to pray in the street because it wasn't safe at that time. So he went home to pray. And where did he face? He faced Jerusalem. So this is already a couple hundred years BC that Daniel is facing Jerusalem, our holy temple, the temple wasn't even around then. It was already destroyed. The first temple was destroyed. So there was no temple that he was facing, but he was facing the place that we hold so dear and we believe is so holy. So we know that our prayers and God's presence is not confined to Jerusalem, but it is the holiest place in the world. And therefore we face it and we direct our prayers. Someone's praying on a plane, or if someone's praying somewhere and they don't know which direction Jerusalem is, it says you should have in mind that your prayers should go through the gates of Jerusalem. It was actually last week, I got a message from someone, and there was a group, a battalion in Gaza, and the story was verified. It was a battalion in Gaza, and they were, they take over all like ruined apartments and places to camp out. And this group of the IDF was located somewhere, and one of the fellows in the battalion was religious, and he would make sure to pray. Now, obviously, in wartime, praying is for like literally a few minutes. You can't, you're not standing there and praying for hours. You chit-chat. So he tried to figure out which is the direction of Jerusalem, and his whole battalion was, lounging or facing a certain direction. He realized it's the opposite direction. He started taking 3 steps back to pray, more quick, Shmona Esrei, and he had people watching him. And as he turned to take his 3 steps back to face Jerusalem, he saw an ambush.
Mm.
He eliminated the ambush, and literally his whole entire battalion was saved. This was 2 weeks ago. And since then, his whole battalion decided every day they're going to stop to pray mincha. They're going to stop to do the afternoon service. Again, they do it, chick-chack, and if you're Israeli, you could read Hebrew really fast. So they do it really quickly. But this is from the times of Daniel till the times today. And this goes on, and every time we pray, we mention Israel multiple times. Israel is not a new idea. Israel has been mentioned and discussed and brought up. We pray towards Israel. We pray for the rebuilding of Israel. These prayers were created by the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of Great Assembly, who established prayer. And throughout history, throughout the entire experience that we had as Jewish people, people were always making aliyah. Aliyah means people ascending to Israel. Aliyah, plain translation. Anyone know what aliyah means? No. Ascend, very good. To ascend. It's Bavel, Babylon, which was where the exile first started, was like in a valley. So going up to Israel was going up to Israel. Now that was also figuratively. When we're going to Israel, we're going up. It's a status. You're going up in status. In 1915, there was a tremendous group of people who migrated to Israel, even though Israel at that time was not necessarily, or not at all, a Jewish place or a Jewish state. It was, which we're going to go into exactly where it came from, but it was at that point, it was under the Ottoman Empire. And then we had also between 1932 and 1934, there was again a big wave of immigrants going to Israel. Why were they going to Israel? Because Israel is our land. Israel has been our land, and we say it in our prayers and say it in Psalms. There's a famous Psalm. If you look at 3a, there's a famous Psalm right before we start praying the benching, the after grace meal. If you wash, we say after grace, we say benching, and we start off, we say, Richard, could you read this for us? Al Naras Bavel, 3a.
By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept as we remembered Zion, with our willows in its midst. For there our captors asked of us to sing songs. Our tormentors insisted on joyful tunes. Sing for us of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the song of God on foreign soil? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cleave to my palate if I do not remember you, if I do not recall Jerusalem at the height of my joy.
So they were demanded by Nebuchadnezzar to sing the songs that they sang in the temple. They said, we can't sing those songs. And this is a psalm from the times of Nebuchadnezzar, which again was about 450 BCE, where they said, we're remembering Israel, we're remembering Zion. That's the portion that we say any day of the week, that you are making grace after meal, you're making the blessings. On Shabbat and holidays, positive times, we sing something a little bit more, positive and upbeat. And that is 3b. Judith, please.
Sure. A song of ascents. When God returns to the trees of Zion, what will have been like dreams. Our mouths will then be filled with laughter, and our tongues will song. They will then say among the nations, God has done amazing things for this nation.
Right. So this is, again, we hope and we pray and we're positive that we're going to return to Israel. Being that we are always constantly praying and asking and wanting to go to return to Israel, this has been the tradition, not just in the 20th century. From Yemen in 1949, there was a huge group of Jewish people, and you'll see this you could skip for a moment. You could see this is more when Jewish people were persecuted, but throughout the generations, Georgia, whenever Jews were allowed to leave the location that they were in, the first destination, first location that they were going to run to was Israel. Now, this is not modern. This is not just when Zionism began. This takes us back to this picture. This picture is in Tiberias. This is the tomb of the Rambam, the Maimonides. This week was actually his yard site, his anniversary of passing, which was close to 900 years ago. He lived in Egypt. He lived originally in Spain. Yeah, Cordoba, Toledo, then Fez, and then Morocco. He went all around. And ultimately, at the end of his life, he lived in Egypt. He lived in Egypt, and he was a personal physician for the Sultan. And when he passed away, where did he want to be buried? If he couldn't live there during his life, his family actually moved to Israel for a short time, but it was financially very difficult to live in Israel. There was no means. And therefore, they moved out. And he said, okay, if he can't live in Israel, at least he wants to be buried in Israel. Not only him, but we have also the tomb of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Yehuda Halevi lived in Spain, and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi lived in the 1100s. And he also was his whole lifelong dream. And he actually has some beautiful, he was known as a poet. Yehuda Halevi, he immigrated to Israel towards the end of his life, just so that he could be buried there. This is a very common theme. People all the time that pass away in the States, in Canada, anywhere in the world, they'll be buried in Israel. It's not because it's a beautiful destination and they want their family to visit them when they're on vacation. It's because it's a holy land. Which I just ruined the joke, but they say that someone said that they're opening up a cemetery right next to Yorkdale Mall. Because the old fellows want that their grandkids should meet them every once in a while. So but that's not why people are being buried in Israel. People are being buried in Israel. Let's see what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi writes. 1100, he lived in 1100, 1100s, 1141 was when he died. So that is 900 years ago. Almost 1,000 years ago, this individual lived. He was a great man. Text number 5, we could see what he writes. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, and this is printed in his book. It's a whole poem about how he speaks that he wants and he prays and he desires to live in where? In Israel. Would you like to read? Oh, you don't. Number 5.
I'm at the end of the well. How can I taste what I eat? And how could it be savored? How shall I render my vows and my vows? While Zion is yet in the fetters of Rome, and I am in the shackles of Arabia. It shall be as easy for me to forsake all the bounty of Spain, as it is precious for me to behold the dust of the desolate abode.
So he's saying that even though Spain at that time was a renaissance, it was a place that of riches, but Jewish people said, I'm ready to abandon that to live in Israel.
Rabbi?
Yes.
The whole issue is that really what Hashem wants? Hashem wants us to give up, there's certain things here in Canada, that used to, and maybe it makes me a lazy Jew, because I don't have to worry what the average woman in Israel is doing. In terms of safety, in terms of everything. So and then I said, I want, Israel doesn't want me in a pine box, 6 feet under. Israel wants me now, going there, working, giving up my superficiality and helping,
That's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi said. And that's what he did. He said, I'm not going to just go there in a pine box. I want to go there beforehand.
Yeah.
And I guess contribute to what Israel had to offer.
Yeah.
The discussion about the security of Israel is beyond the scope of this course, to be honest, because that could get already, that's,
I know, I'm sorry.
but I understand what you're saying, and it has place. It has truth. Ultimately, we answered, at least we touched upon the first question of what does Israel have to do with Jewish people? Everything we walked through. We saw some very noticeable things that we've experienced, we know about. Where Israel has very much to do with Jewish people. I know this was in the beginning of the 2000s when John Kerry in America was after he was voted out, he didn't become president, but he did want to give his thoughts and opinions on different things. And he made a comment which highlighted I don't even know how to describe it, but he said basically, when it came at the discussion about Jerusalem, he said, what's the big deal? Why don't they just make a wall somewhere else to pray by? Which, besides for the disconnect and disrespect, it's a lack of realization. It's a lack of knowledge, lack of history, whatever. So we've answered, as Kimberly, as you said, what does Judaism have to do with Israel? Everything. I mean, after all, what are we called? We're called Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel. This is where the spikes and the excitement of our class picks up, and I'm going to ask you to pay attention here to an 8-minute video, which gives us the background of the 6-Day War and why it is relevant to our life right now, today, 50 years after, and even longer.
Need and fury of Israel's military victory. The dreadful days of rage and trepidation leading to the outbreak of hostilities were no less dramatic. The Arab nations refused to accept Israel's presence. To the Arab mind, the humiliation of their defeat in 1948 could be removed only by soaking the Holy Land in the blood of its Jewish inhabitants. In the months before June 1967, calls for Israel's annihilation swelled into a hysterical battle cry in the streets of every Arab country in the Middle East. Stood at the heart of this incitement. The charismatic leader with appeal across the Arab world, Nasser campaigned for Arab unity and for the military destruction of Israel. His blood-curdling speeches were broadcast to every Arab nation, inflaming populations and shaping anti-Israel policy.
Familiar?
Israel was a precarious sliver of land along the Mediterranean sand, barely 12 miles wide at her waist, and dwarfed by colossal foes in every direction. Egypt growled to her south, Jordan menaced her eastern border, and Syria rained mortars onto her north. These three nations commanded formidable standing armies and boasted hundreds of modern tanks, aircrafts, and artillery units. Additional Arab countries were prepared to offer varying degrees of commitment to any war against Israel, ranging from symbolic support to actual pilots, planes, tanks, and troops. Foremost among these were Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Kuwait, and Lebanon. Behind these loomed a larger foe, the Soviet Union, which armed and advised many of the Arab governments. Israel leaned on the support of a heavyweight but half-hearted ally, the United States of America. But President Lyndon B. Johnson, who took office in 1963, mired as he was in the Vietnam War, was more concerned with de-escalating the Cold War than addressing Israel's existential concerns. It was the Soviets who extended a lit match to the Arab powder keg that erupted in the 1967 Six-Day War. On May 13, 1967, the Soviets supplied Egypt with false intelligence, claiming that Israel has mobilized to invade Syria. They urged Egypt to take action, and in the first act of aggression, Nasser pulls his enormous Egyptian army into the Sinai Peninsula towards Israel's southern border. The Arab world erupts in euphoric celebrations and calls to slaughter the Jews. Nasser becomes an instant hero. Israel and the UN publicly clarify that Israel is not mobilized against Syria, but Nasser responds on May 15 by ordering the UN peacekeeping force that forms a buffer between Egypt and Israel to withdraw from Sinai. Israel's government is thrown into panic. UN Secretary General U Thant unilaterally orders his peacekeepers to comply with Nasser's demand. On May 19th, to Israel's horror and to the world's astonishment, the UN emergency force vanishes, leaving Israel exposed to a vast Egyptian force that would swell in just 3 days to some 80,000 troops and 600 tanks. Israel orders a large-scale mobilization of its army reserves and issues a stern warning that should Egypt close the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, Israel will consider it an act of war react accordingly. Meanwhile, the Arab world escalates its rhetoric. On May 18th, Cairo Radio broadcast the following message.
Every one of the 100 million Arabs has been living for the past 19 years on one hope, to live to see the day Israel is liquidated. There is no life, no peace, nor hope for the gangs of Zionism to remain in the occupied land. As of today, there no longer exists the UN International Emergency Force to protect Israel. The sole method we shall apply against Israel is a total war, which will result in the extermination of Zionist existence.
On May 20th, Syria's defense minister, Hafez Assad, declares,
Our forces are now entirely ready, not only to repulse any aggression, but to initiate the act ourselves, and to explode the Zionist presence in the Arab homeland of Palestine. The Syrian army, with its finger on the trigger, is united. I believe that the time has come to begin a battle of annihilation.
And then it happened. On May 23rd, Egypt blockaded the Straits of Tehran to Israeli shipping in an act of war under international law. Israel's oil supply route is now cut off. No nation has rallied to Israel's cause. Mayor Amit, head of the Israeli Mossad, later recalled the tense days before the outbreak of the war.
In the middle of the night, I received a visit from the CIA representative in Israel, who said to me, if you shoot first, you will stand alone in this battle.
Israel's military, intelligence, and civil leadership anticipate the worst. With Israeli men drafted into the army, the economy falters. Life grinds to a standstill. Students, housewives, and children dig trenches, build shelters, and volunteer for essential services. Anticipating record loss of life, Israel designates parks as mass cemeteries. A spirit of despair settled over the country's 2 million Jews, who whisper with dread of a second Holocaust. But Nasser is upbeat. He is ready for war. On May 26th, Nasser addresses the General Council of the International Confederation of Arab Trade Unions.
We are ready to enter a general war with Israel. The battle will be a general one, and our basic objective will be to destroy Israel.
On May 30th, King Hussein of Jordan signs a defense treaty with Egypt, placing the Jordanian army under Egyptian command. The Egyptian-Syrian-Jordanian axis is now complete. Ahmed Shakari, chairman of the PLO in Jordanian Jerusalem, is asked in a June 1st news interview what will happen to the Israelis if there is a war. His response,
those who survive will remain in Palestine. I estimate that none of them will survive.
The Arab military buildup continues. Egypt has 100,000 troops, 930 tanks on assignment, and another 110,000 soldiers and 450 combat aircraft on notice. Syria has 63,000 troops, and Jordan 55,000. Israel's mostly civilian army is absurdly outnumbered in manpower, weaponry, planes, tanks, and artillery. Slightly more than 2 decades after the Holocaust, and Egypt's residents authorized the Jewish people to create a state in their ancient homeland. The world had turned its back on the Jewish state and its population of survivors. There was no response to the Arab claim that the Jewish people are interlopers in their own land and have no right to the biblical land of Israel.
This paints a backdrop to what led to the 6-Day War. Quoting some people that we don't like to usually quote, but the 6-Day War, well, we won't quote them, but 6-Day War didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened with the Israelis being a country and the Arab nations not being able to handle that reality. Now, since the 6-Day War, much has changed and much has not. Yes.
So tomorrow, you have nowhere at 4 o'clock on Front Street, you all flash car out, stay in front. If you don't have to be there, don't be there. There's gonna be a protest. There's gonna be one on Sunday on Front Street too. There's a calendar of protest dates that are, some Jewish rabbi that's gonna organize this. I'm not sure what it's gonna be. I'm not sure. Anyway. So it goes, as of now, it goes all the way to February 29th. So every day there is somewhere in the world that there's a protest. So US gets almost a share of every day. I think Canada, I think repeated places.
You're reiterating what the video said. There's a lot of people who don't want us to be around. So we'll continue with the advisory. That's the Nakuda. Be careful. Don't go where you shouldn't go. But we're going to just continue on now. That what has changed? 1967, after the 6-Day War, we got the Koso. We got the Western Wall. The Western Wall at that time was a tiny little space that was used as a trash dump for many years. Excuse me, and it was dangerous for anyone to go. And it was cleared away. And all the homes that were built right next to the wall to try to hide the Western Wall were demolished. And you see Western Wall today is, thank God, packed and full and able to come there. There was a unit in the IDF that was trying to protect the Sinai Desert, which was a very, very small and flimsy unit. And again, if you look a little bit further, this was again 2017, but it's progressed even since then. You have the Iron Dome. Thank God things have been progressing. In the science field, things have progressed. Israel is from the top contributors in science and in medicine and in most things in the world, in music and arts. There was the Egyptian attack at that time in 1978, which had an unnecessary and catastrophic result, but ultimately Begin sat down with Sadat, who was the representation of Egypt at that time, so came full circle, and they're ready to be at peace with Israel. That's a lot of things that had changed, and people have embraced Israel throughout the years. Unfortunately, we see that this mask of PC and PR, politically correct, and playing the PR game, unfortunately falls away when Israel's under the limelight. And what hasn't changed is the call for destruction, the threat of our existence, and the hostile world opinion, which we unfortunately see very often. And now it's clearer than ever. So our question is, and these are the questions that we're going to be addressing, is what's Israel's right to exist? And this keeps on being brought into a question, meaning what gives us the right for the Jewish people to be living in Israel and call it our place? How many people from the international community in general are okay with us being there? And how many of them are not interested in dealing with the Israel problem? So I want to start with the claim to the land. And this is really where our discussion picks up. And there are 3 claims that we have to Israel. There are ultimately 3 reasons why us Jews deserve Israel. There's number 1 is a historical claim. Historical claim is what we discussed. We've been praying to Israel for years. You look back in history, the tomb of Rachel was in Israel. That was literally Jacob's wife. That's thousands of years ago. These things are facts. Jewish people had lived in Israel, and we're going to discuss that claim, historical claim. The next one is the international law claim. We have rights to Israel. We own it. We were given it by the UN, and we're going to discuss that soon. Internationally, legally, we own Israel, and we have the rights to Israel. And then there is the survival claim. is that what if we didn't have Israel? Look what happened when we didn't have a land. We had a Holocaust. We've been pogroms and all these things throughout. We need a land. We need a place to be safe. And we're going to go through each of these. We're going to see why each claim is essential and where are the weaknesses in these claims. The first historical claim we're going to delve into, if you see the Jewish people, and there's evidence that we have been around, and this is an inscription of a victory. I don't even know how to pronounce that word. Is that Stele? Basically, this stone that documents a victory from the times of King David, which again is almost 1,000 years BCE. That's close to 3,000 years ago. That's a long time ago. Jewish people have been there for a long time. Say, I just heard this actually recently. They said that, there was a professor in a college in the United States. Colleges here aren't any better, but a Jewish professor was discussing this whole ownership of Israel. And before he started the class, there was a number of people heard Israel's going to be discussed. They, come with their, battle axes. They're all ready to argue. And he said, before I begin, I want to tell you about Moses. Moses, he couldn't go into the land of Israel. God didn't allow him to go into the land of Israel. But God did say that you could look on a mountain, go onto a mountain, and you could look at Israel. Okay. He said, so before he did that, he decided he was going to immerse in water, like a mikvah. And he took off his clothing and he went into the mikvah, went into the water. He came out and his clothing was gone. And he asked the class, do you know who stole his clothing? I said, no. He said it was the Palestinians who stole his clothing. And right away, some angry students piped up, says, what are you talking about? You're a liar. You see, you Jews make up stories. Palestinians weren't around then. He says, exactly. With this, I'll begin my class. So we have been there forever. We've been there for thousands of years. The Temple Mount is our temple from 3,000 years ago, right after King David in the year about 830 BCE is when the temple was built. That's a lot of years ago. So we have very strong base for our living in the land of Israel. We have more evidence of the second temple, meaning Judaism wasn't just in Israel 3,000 years ago, but we were there again. And if you see this chart on page 11, it's actually very interesting to see from pretty much the creation from Abraham, from the life of Abraham, 2000 BC till 2000 CE, so 4,000 years. It shows the presence of the Jewish people in Israel for these 4,000 years. So there's Abraham came to the Holy Land, then it was conquered by Joshua. From the time it was conquered by Joshua, for about 1,000 years, Jewish people lived and settled. And you'll see that's when there was Jewish sovereignty over Israel. After that, there was sovereignty of other nations, but Jews still lived in Israel. And then the Jewish people left for a short time, or at least didn't have sovereignty. There were still Jews there throughout. There was never a time period where there were no Jews. There were times when there was very small communities of Jewish people. And there's even a family that lives in the Galil till today. And they track themselves down that they've lived the same location. Their family has lived in the same location since the destruction of the first temple. That's close to 3,000 years that their family has lived in that region. They've continued. Even when Jews were exiled, there always was a group of Jews who were allowed to stay. It was most of the Jews and the special Jews, whatever, were taken. And when Jews returned to Israel for the second temple, for example, the prophet who brought them specifically brought back those people who were lower class. Especially then, there were a lot of tears. He brought back specifically the lower class. Number one, so he could care for them. Number two is he knew that he was leaving a group of Jews in exile. He wanted to leave those who were studious, who knew, who were able to study, who were able to, help Judaism flourish, even though they weren't in Israel. So ultimately, we have as well the Bar Kokhba. These are coins that were found This is, again, 2,200 years old, 2,100 years old. These are coins that show the temple, and these are the times of Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba tried to regain control, thank you so much, at the times of the Romans, and he actually, for a very short time, they almost broke away and became their own thing, and then they started building a temple, and he was shot down, and that's the famous Masada and what have you. So ultimately, our historical claim is really, really strong. It's undisputable. No self-respecting historian could argue that the Jewish people weren't in Israel thousands of years ago and haven't been there throughout. We haven't had sovereignty the whole time, but haven't been there throughout. Here is the counterclaim. The counter argument, which shakes, I wouldn't say the core, but it is a question, is many places, many countries, many nations have lived in many places. Just because 3,000 years ago we had a temple in Jerusalem, why does that give us the right to get it back now? Right? There are many countries, or I should say probably most countries, that have taken over land throughout the past generations. You look at England, you look at half of Europe, whole Europe, you look at countries that they didn't always have sovereignty over a location. And it changed hands, and it belongs to other people. Does that give us the right? The fact that we historically lived there, is that an absolute reason why we should be getting it back? We also conquered it from others. It's conquest, so we conquered it from people, and they conquered it from us. The Romans conquered it. Maybe Israel should belong to Rome. Maybe it should belong to Iraq, which is, Babylon from back in the day. Changed hands from time to time. So we have the historical argument, but we do have room to say that it's not strong enough. It's not strong enough. There is a counter argument. There is a counterclaim that, hey, okay, great. So you did live there thousands of years ago. No problem. We'll agree. I mean, which we're going to discuss in a minute, that every single religion, any religion, or definitely the other two big religions in the world, which is Islam and Christianity, part of their belief is also that Jews were in Israel. That's part of the whole thing. So it's undisputed that Jews were in Israel, but we have this counterclaim. So we'll fast forward. Okay, 3,000 years ago won't be strong enough. So let's fast forward to 1917, the famous Balfour Declaration, where I want to maybe read a little bit of it. I'm not sure if it's in here, page 7, actually 6. 6 as the Declaration of Independence from Israel. But just to give you a little bit of a background on the Balfour Declaration, and many of you may have a little bit better majors in history, but make a long story short, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and there was groups that were created called Zionist parties that felt that it would be the safest thing and the best thing for Jews people to live in their own place. Jews being amongst non-Jews is not a good idea. So A, you could hide that you're Jewish, or B, let's just not live amongst non-Jews. Let's, even a ghetto, it's going to be issues with other people. Get the Jews out of the picture, and Jews won't be bothered. And therefore, they felt like this was something to, why don't we move out, get our own country, and this will give Jewish people a sense of, respect or sovereignty over our own people. 7D is Balfour Declaration. Oh, okay. So this Balfour Declaration, just a moment, we're going to see, was actually from 1517 for 400 years. The Ottoman Empire ruled over Israel. Israel was under the Ottoman Empire. We spoke about this a couple months ago when we were sitting in Fabring, because it was under Turkish rule. And that's when the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, was sending money to Israel, and they thought that the Russians thought that he was trying to fight against, because Israel was synonymous with the Turks. Ultimately, there was a famous mandate of Palestine. And this mandate of Palestine, which was made by the League of Nations in the early 1900s, which the League of Nations kind of turned into the UN, entrusted Palestine. They broke up the whole Ottoman Empire, and they said Palestine, this area, which Palestine was not just Israel, it was Israel and Jordan and beyond. They said Palestine or Palestina, this area is going to be given to Britain. By the way, the name Palestine came from long time before, actually, and it was given to Israel or that region was actually by the Romans soon after the destruction, and the purpose was because there was a nation called the Philistines, and biblical times, there was a nation called the Philistines. The Philistines liked to terrorize the Jewish people. Couldn't stand that the Jews were in Israel, even though Jews conquered Israel, and they were always waging war and bothering and terrorizing the Jewish people in Israel. And the arch enemy of the Jews was always the Philistines. So once Rome captured the Jews, and there were Jews living in that area, they decided to, despite the Jews and in spite of the Jewish people, we're going to name your neighborhood after your enemies, which is Palestine, Palestina, a variation of that, because it's named after the Plishtim, unconnected to the Arabs that live there now. And this was a way of, humiliating them. So ultimately, they created the Kingdom of Transjordan, and this was Palestine. Now, we'll see what the Balfour Declaration ultimately decided, that let's split up Transjordan and give the Jewish people a small section, and let the Jewish people, okay, you'll have your little neighborhood and just be quiet. So 7b, Esther, you read, right? Robert, could you read 7b?
This right was recognized in the Belfort Declaration. Second of November, 1970. We affirm the United Nations, which in particular the international sanctions for the historic connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, and the right of the Jewish people to rebuild its home.
So this is actually the Declaration of Independence from Israel in 1948, saying why the birth of Israel and what made us own the land was the UN voted, and there was 161 countries that were pro, and that was the majority. And now there's 192 countries in the UN that have, recognized Israel as a country, and ultimately establishing Israel as a country in 1948. Continue.
On the 29th of November 1947, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution calling for the establishment of a Jewish state of Israel. The General Assembly required the inhabitants of the land of Israel to take such steps as were necessary on their part for the implementation of that resolution. This recognition by the United Nations of the right of Jewish people to establish the state is irrevocable.
So it's irrevocable. It's a Jewish state. Just like there's any law, just like if you speed, you get a ticket. And if a person who is born in Canada is considered a Canadian, that is a law. So Israel, with the borders that they gave, according to international law, belongs now to the Jewish people. That's a pretty strong argument. Law is a law. You can't argue with that. Or could you? If a law is a law, what happens when lawmakers decide to change the law?
But even back in 1937,
Yeah.
If you'll testify before the Appeal Commission, there was no such thing as the country of Palestine.
Correct. No such thing as the country of Palestine?
There's no such country as Palestine. That is a direct quote by Anu Bey Abdul Hadi to the Appeal Commission in 1937.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, there were people who would want to deny it, and there were people who couldn't handle that from the get-go, as we saw. There were certain Arab countries that said, no, even though, again, Transjordan, a tiny little sliver was given to Israel, the rest was actually created the Kingdom of Jordan, which Jordan is just as new or even newer than Israel. But what happens if our right to Israel is purely law-based, legally? If that's our right, then what happens if the UN changes their mind, as they seem to recently? So we are very dependent on individuals who are writing the laws. Someone once told me that it was by one of the cases in the Supreme Court in the United States. He said, you know, the way that the Supreme Court judges, or not only the Supreme Court, other judges bend the Constitution to learn out things incorrectly or take it so far. It's like it's the way that certain people try to, you know, pervert certain laws in Judaism and like learn the opposite out of it. You know, so if you're dependent on a bunch of people that are not even voted in by their country, they're just representatives that the country decided to send in. If they decide that, you know, okay, it was a nice thing to have Israel, now this section should go somewhere else, then how strong is our international law claim? Not so strong.
Pretty revocable.
Very revocable. Yeah, even though it's on the basis that it's not revocable, it's very. So comes the dire and concerning and scary claim that's, you know, serious survival, Jewish survival. Jews have been persecuted forever, and we need a land. We need a place that we could feel safe. We need our own country. For 2,000 years, we've been expelled, slaughtered, killed, murdered, harassed, pogromed. We need a place that we can call our own, that we won't be kicked out of. We need our own land. Even Israel, before it was established, during the British government mandate, Jews, they had quotas, and many Jews were not able to immigrate to Israel. It's our country. We weren't able to immigrate because it was under the sovereignty of others. When right before the war, there was a number of people who did immigrate to Israel, but there was a lot more that wanted to, but they couldn't come in. They had a max of how many Jews they were going to allow in Palestine. That's the British mandate. And too bad. So we needed a place, and our survival is dependent, especially when you see a Holocaust, when we're left up to the pity of others, it's not going to work. So we need a place to call our home, and Israel is a perfectly safe place. It's a perfectly great place to be able to call our own, and we could protect ourselves. 7C, Amit.
The catastrophe which recently befell the Jewish people, massacre of millions of Jews in Europe, was another clear demonstration of the urgency of solving the problem of its homelessness by reestablishing the land of Israel, the Jewish state, which would open the gates of the homeland wide to every Jew and confer upon the Jewish people status of fully privileged member of the Committee of Nations.
So ultimately, in the Declaration of Independence of Israel, first of all, L'chaim Amit. Israel, Amit is from Israel. Amit served in the IDF, and Amit's family is right now in Israel. L'chaim Amit, for you, for your mishpacha, for all of us who have a lot of family in Israel. L'chaim.
She's back in Israel. I know.
So ultimately, what Israel in the declaration is saying, we are going to be creating a safe haven. Any Jew who would like internationally has a place that they could come. There was never such a thing. Any Jew has a location that they can run to, and they'll be accepted with open arms. But that's beautiful. However, that claim is not good enough. And the reason for that is, could be a number of counterclaims. First of all, if the Jewish people need a location, then if that's your concern, you need a location, then why does it have to be in this location in the world? Have it be somewhere else. And that might sound silly to you, but that was actually taken into consideration. Even Theodore Herzl considered taking Uganda as a Jewish state. You serious? Are you kidding? Really?
Neighbors.
The idea of Uganda was because Britain owned big parts of Africa. It was a colony. So they said, okay, we'll give you another part of Africa. British were trying to be, forthcoming and respectful. Also, there is a place called Birobijan, which is a place far out near like Kazakhstan in East Russia. That's right. And they were going to say, you know what, let's just ship all the Jews there and you'll have your country there. And at some point, there was close to 30,000 Jews who immigrated there, thinking, on the rumors that, hey, there's a Jewish state that's going to be made there. So if that's our claim, that we need to be safe, okay, no problem. Be safe in Grand Island. Be safe in Uganda. Make your country somewhere else. Why does it have to be this prime location of Israel? Another question, another counterclaim to the survival element is, if you have all the Jews concentrated in one location, maybe that's more concerning. One of the things that it says, it actually speaks of the greatness. There's a verse that says that God did a favor to the Jewish people and he spread them out. That God did a favor and he spread us out amongst all the other nations. Why is that a favor? Because if God forbid, and we see this time and time again, if God forbid something happens to a community of Jewish people, number one, there still will be a Jewish nation, even if a community is wiped out. Number two, we're able to come to aid each other, which we've seen throughout history, especially recently in the Holocaust, and more recently, just now. There's people, there's money, there's funds, there's what? There's many places where we're able to, assist. So Jewish people being all concentrated, if every single Jewish person lived in Israel, a lot of people are like, I don't know if it's such a great idea that every Jew should live in Israel. That's not so safe. You got to have like a savings account somewhere else.
I also, the Rabbi said, because the redemption of the world depends on the Kedusha being elevated throughout the world. That's the reason why we have to be.
That also. That's right.
And we were 11 tribes? How many?
12. The Rebbe actually says that, and it's been proven, and again, we're not going to go into the security discussion, but ultimately Israel, the Rebbe says, is the safest place. And I've been speaking to people since Simchas Torah. I have a number of friends. I have friends in the Air Force, in IDF, I have friends in the Army. A friend of mine just posted today. He shows a picture of him. I said, I didn't know he was in the Army. He actually was a shliach in China. And then I think after COVID, his city was difficult to deal with, so he ended up leaving. And he posted a picture of himself in uniform. And he's like, yep, at 31, I just enlisted. So, wow. Right? So, and they tell me, they said, you know what? We actually feel bad for people that are not in Israel. Because they're like, over here, we're going through craziness, but, our morale is high. I'm scared to walk out of our house and wave an Israeli flag. I hear about everyone else in the world is all petrified of anti-Semitism, so that we're not having those issues here. So that's two claims of our survival. And the third one is a painful one, but has been voiced already. And that is just because we're being attacked, why should the world care less? Why is that a claim? That's a nice pity claim, but why should that claim be respected? So what? I'm very sorry to hear that. And the claim from the Arab countries has said that in the past. It's one of their claims is, what if the state of Israel was created on the platform of the Holocaust? Why are we to blame, or why do we have to take the brunt of a European war? What do we have to do with it? I'm very sorry. Even someone who could be, understand, I'm sorry that this happened to your nation, but why is that my problem? So ultimately, we went through some of the most basic claims, and we realized that Jewish people and Israel is not found favor in people's eyes. And every one of these claims are constantly being debunked. What do we have? The hypocrisy that we see in the world is mind-boggling. And the question begs, this is statistics, real things, is that countries that acquired land through conquest or settlement is over 190 lands, and no one is called out about it. Every single country, how do you think, again, before this war with Russia, but like, how do you think the United States became a country? How did Canada, how did any country, how did England, how any country was on conquest? Why all of a sudden, when Israel has its land through conquest, through history, through, thank you so much, through international law, through survival, are we being called out? Why are people obsessed with Israel?
Jealousy.
Why?
I also think that
Jealousy.
the idea of nations deriving up conquest, it is a little bit more of an archaic one. So how many nations can you name in the past 100 years that have done that? Because your claims to Canada, the US, I mean everything, Romans, everyone, but that idea of a nation arising in such a fashion has kind of stopped in modern history. So maybe that's one of the reasons why there's an uneasiness from our naysayers.
But that's the system we have, that humans have developed, that he who wins the war. I mean, look what Putin is doing in Ukraine.
And it's not that, and I'm only saying that that's like an expansion of territory. We were just saying, well, what nation spurred itself and created itself out of like conflict?
So these are flaws. These are flaws with one element of these three things. Right. I mean, they're flaws. Yeah, they're. I mean, we could argue those flaws, but they're valid arguments against us.
Which did happen with Sudan. That spurred out of nowhere, and look what's going on now. So it occurred in a situation. I was just bringing light to maybe why it's not. I'm not saying I believe in it.
Yeah, no, but also so for that, international law will play a role, is because it was given to us by the UN. So if you look at most of the Arab countries, their borders were set up in like the 40s and 50s by the UN, and take all the former Soviet Union, Slovakia, Slovenia, Ukraine, any of those countries in that whole Eastern European region, Bulgaria, Romania, all Hungary, all their borders were what? This was in the 90s or the 80s when they were pronounced that this is a country and this is the space. I remember seeing, I had as a kid, I collected a lot of coins. So I had $100,000 bill from Czechoslovakia. I felt like the richest kid in the world. And then I asked a friend who grew up in Kiev, I said, how much is this worth? He's like, not as much as my toilet paper. I was like, oh, man. Yeah.
And it was right after the Soviet Union broke up.
Oh my God.
Crazy times.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the borders there, it was called the Czech and Slovak Federated Republic for about a year because they couldn't decide what they were going to do with it.
Right. So again, countries took their places and spaces. So ultimately, we need to find what is our right to Israel. Is our right so shaky that it could be argued, and it is being argued? Yes, Kimberly.
I was going to say, when you said something about the cover of this and our right to, and you kind of chuckled at the word right, and I agree with you. We have as much rights as anybody else.
Right. Right. Exactly. But just like, well, I mean, we we're experiencing it now in a lot of places. I'm not going to go into it, but a lot of people say, hey, you should give back certain lands to the indigenous, California, I mean, America should, and whether there is reason for that, there isn't. These countries are strong enough that they don't have to be concerned about the small, minorities that are making loud, voices that, okay, we should give back Toronto to them. Like, seriously? Okay, we could respect them, we could give them maybe some privileges, but no one in their right mind, even if they're going to tweet that they do, no one's actually ready to give up land to anyone, right? So, right, give back California to Mexico. I mean, instead we're just letting the border open and have the Mexicans move there. No, but ultimately it's true, and we're going to see why our right to Israel is undisputable and why it's so necessary. So first of all, the very first Rashi. We spoke about Rashi as a commentator in the 1900s, not 1900s, in the 10th, yes, 11th, 12th century, thank you, in the 1000s, 1040 and 11, I have it written, 1105, I thought it was 1130. 1105, he passed away. Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, lived in France, and he writes a commentary on the entire Torah. And Rashi, who lived 900 years ago, close to 1,000 years ago, he writes something that was written 700 years before him. And let's read that. Text number 8. Mike.
Rabbi Yitzhak said, the Torah ought to have begun with the verse, this month shall be to you, etc. The first mitzvah commanded to the people of Israel. Why? Then does it begin with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The strength of his work he related to his people, to give them the inheritance of the nations. If the nations of the world will say to Israel, you are thieves for having conquered the lands of the 7 nations, Israel will reply, the entire world is God's. He created it, granted it to whomever he desired. It was his will to give it to the 7 nations, and it was his will to take it from them and give it to us.
This is a medrash. Rabbi Yitzchak said this 1,700 years ago. You would think he's a prophet. He literally said this 1,700 years ago. What happened was, why did Rashi pick this? And I'm just going to go through this quickly. That Rashi had a question. His question that Rashi is addressing is, the Torah is a book of laws. It's supposed to be our direction. It's not a history book. There are history books that are written throughout. Not a history book. Torah is a book of laws. It's to teach us how. It's Torah. Torah means direction, a guide. It's supposed to teach us laws. The first mitzvah in the Torah is in the middle of Exodus. A book and a half into the whole 5 books of Moses comes the first mitzvah. By the way, you guys are Jews. This is what you should do. Have the first month, says HaChodesh Hazeh, that this month should be the first month for you. That was the first mitzvah that we have. So the question that he asks is, why did the Torah begin with the whole story of Genesis? Or even more, why did it start with the creation? In the beginning, God created this beautiful, it's a nice story. Why does it have to tell us about the creation of the world? Why didn't it just say, God said to Moses, do this, that, and the other thing. Here's the checklist. This is where Rashi comes in and he says, to tell you, God created the world. And being that he created it, he decided what land goes to who. And if you read further in the Torah, you'll see God told Abraham, God told Isaac, God told Jacob. He told them that this land is yours. The first time God spoke to Abraham, Lech lecha ma'artzecha, go leave your land and go where? To Israel. The first instruction, the first encounter that God and Abraham have a conversation, go to Israel. The covenant between parts, when God makes a covenant with Abraham, he says, I am choosing you as my nation, you and your descendants. Abraham doesn't have any children yet. He says, God says, I swear to you that we're going to make a pact, you're going to be my nation, and this land will be yours. It's written in Genesis. The promise to Isaac. When Isaac gets a little older, God appears to him once Abraham dies. God appears to Isaac and he says, this is your land. You're living in Israel. This is your land. The promise to Jacob. Before Jacob leaves Israel to go down to Egypt, where his son Joseph is, God tells him, don't be scared. You're going to go down to Egypt. I'm going to be with you, and you will come back to this land, and I'm going to give it to you. The burning bush. The burning bush didn't happen in Israel. It happened on Mount Sinai, but God told Moses, what did God tell Moses? Redeem the Jewish people and bring them to my promised land. It's undisputable that the land of Israel was given as a gift to the Jewish people. The entire narrative of the book of Genesis and the first part of Exodus is letting us know, Jewish people, God gave you this land. Now, why is the land so essential? Why did God give us this land? Or for what purpose? And this, I'm going to just go a little bit quicker through and a little less of the text, but I do encourage you if you'd like to take it home and you can read through a little bit on your own. But ultimately, God said to do these mitzvahs, many, many, many mitzvahs. Most mitzvahs in the Torah, there's 613 mitzvahs, right? Everyone, do you do all 613? No, it's not possible to do all 613. Some are for men, some are for women, some are for animals. If you own animals, some are if you own fields, some of them are if you're a Kohen, some of them are if you're a king. You can't be a Kohen, a king, a man, a woman. I mean, nowadays, whatever. But they say there was once a rabbi who was a Kohen. Kohen doesn't go into the cemetery. And there was a rabbi who became Kohen. And his friend came to town. He says, Rabbi, you live in this small town all by yourself. What do you do? He says, I'm the rabbi. I also I do the shechita. I make kosher meat. I also am a mohel. I do the circumcisions. I also run the chevra kadisha. I bury the dead. And I also visit the sick. And he says, 1 minute, you're a Kohen. You can't bury people. He says, no, I bury them alive. You can't do all the mitzvahs in the Torah, and even most of the mitzvahs have to do with the land of Israel. When you plant, when you sow, when Shemitah and Yovel, and all these things have to do with Israel, and half of them have to do with the temple. So mitzvahs, completion and keeping Torah mitzvahs, could only be done in its fullest in the land of not Canada. Very good. Another thing is very interesting. Is that Israel is the epicenter of the world. Israel is the crossroads of society, and ultimately, throughout all generations, Israel was a place that everyone passed through. To get from Europe to Africa by land, you have to go through Israel. It's not possible to pass through without going through Israel. You can take boats. But if you're going to be traveling by land to go from anywhere in the West to Africa, you go through Israel. And that's why every single nationality, every single civilization at some point of time crossed through, conquered, or fought with Israel. Because it's a crossroad. It's a very strategic place, I would say, that God placed it. It's the place that mankind was created. It's the epicenter of holiness. It says the land is holy. The land itself is holy, and the place in this physical world that is holy. This physical world is very mundane. A place in this physical world that is holy is Israel, and this is actually very profound. Text number 10. I do want to tap into it for a quick second. Text number 10. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was the chief rabbi of England or Britain, he wrote very nicely. He says things and he really coins it very well. I don't need to sing his praises. He's an incredible man. You should read up some of his things. RabbiSachs.org. Passed away just 2 years ago. He wasn't too old, but he has some fascinating things. He writes it very well over here. Text number 10. Seth, would you like to read?
Why should religion be tied to land? It sounds absurd, especially in context of monotheism. Surely the God of everywhere can be served anywhere. Judaism is not primarily about personal salvation. The relationship between the individual and God in the inner research of the soul is about collective redemption. We are social animals, therefore, we find God in society. That is what we discover when we reflect on the basic structure of the Torah's many commandments. They include laws about the manipulation of justice, the conduct of war, ownership of land, employee relationships, the welfare of the poor, and the periodic conservation of land. Laws shape a society, and society needs space. A sacred society needs sacred space. A holy land needs sacred space. The holy land. These Jews and Judaism meet their own land in 4,000 years, for much of which Jews lived in exile. The people of the continent were scattered over the face of the earth. There is no land in which Jews have never lived. Yet, in all those centuries, there was only one land where they were able to be what almost every other nation takes for granted.
And listen to this. Israel was the only place and is the only place where we could create a society in accordance with our beliefs. It's the only place that we can be Jews to its fullest. If you want to be Canadian here. If you want to, every place takes for granted that they could be nationalist and patriotic in their location. The only place that a Jew could be a Jew to the fullest is in the physical land of Israel. Yes, you could be a Jew anywhere you are, and Judaism is not bound by it. But if you want to be able to do the mitzvahs, which that's what being a Jew is ultimately, it's a ladder. It's, to do everything. If you want to be the ultimate, could it be only done in Israel? So the land is so crucial for us. We spoke about the crossroads of society, and I would say that the reason that the Holy Land is part of the keystone link between the East and West, again, is that God had placed it in our responsibility, because we are a light unto the nations. We are meant to interact with others, and we're meant to be able to give that light. Ultimately, we asked the question of, so why are people so obsessed? We have really good reasons why we own Israel. God gave it to us. I can't think of a better reason. It was literally handed. If you believe in religion, then you believe in God, and you believe in the Bible. And the Bible literally says that God gave the land to the Jewish people. Could there be a better argument? There is literally no other argument. If you don't believe in the Bible, then okay, then we can't really speak. It's all a different discussion. But if you believe in that, then there is no argument. So why are people so obsessed with us and Israel? And this, we're going to conclude the whole discussion class with this, and that is because we're different. And this is something that we could think about, is that people think, and this is not what Judaism thinks, people think that to be spiritual, to be holy, to be good, that means to separate from the world. They think God is God of the heavens. That's spirituality. Spirituality means spirit, not physical. If Judaism is so holy, if Judaism is so spiritual, if Judaism is all about the spirit and God, no problem. I'm a believer. I believe in God. I believe in the Jews. You guys are amazing. God exists. No problem. Everything is good. Why are you so caught up in a piece of land? For heaven's sake. Why are you going after land? You should be sitting and meditating on the top of the mountains in India. Why are you going after land? And this is, I would say, the ultimate purpose and the ultimate, depiction and representation of Jews in this world. And that is, God and the world are not opposites. God created a world where he wants us to live in and to behave like Jews in this physical world. So yes, the land of Israel is not like, oh, there's a holy people and they push it just practically. They need a place to put their head down. They need to put their feet up. They need a home. Okay, so there's this location. God created a space that this is where you can be an optimum Jew and bring the godliness that exists into this world. To bring it in a tangible way, it needs to be in this world. And we're in this holy land of Israel. It says in the Rambam and Maimonides about, is one of the sources that we skipped, you can check later, that Jewish people for centuries, when they would come to Israel, they would kiss the soil. They would want to be buried in Israel. Why? Because the actual soil is holy. Till this day, it's a custom by many, it's not like a law, that in the casket, when someone's buried outside Israel, they put a little bit of dirt from Israel. Because even the dirt of Israel is holy, special. So Israel has a very unique thing. It's like, it's an interesting paradox. Israel is a physical location with a spiritual undertone, with a spiritual energy. And anyone who's visited Israel could vouch for it. I've heard it from tons of people, and people who are the most irreligious and the most not believers and not spiritual and not floaty and not, going on playing guitar in the middle of Tzvat. Regular, normal, healthy, grounded, individual thinking intellectuals will tell you Israel has a beat, has something different. And with that, I would like to touch upon the last source over here, page 13 again, not page 13, text 13, which again is Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Sachs, and I think he puts it into great words. And if you could, Jacob, would you like to read for us text 13, especially at the end of the second paragraph? You got to listen to the way he words it. I think it's beautiful.
They, the overwhelming majority of those who challenge Israel's right to exist, believe in Israel's God. That is to say, the God of Abraham. They belong to the large family of faith known as Abrahamic monotheism. To them, we must humbly say, when it comes to political conflict, let us search for a political solution. Let us work together in the pursuit of peace. But when it comes to religion, let us not forget that without Judaism, there would be no Christianity and no Islam.
There's no compromising when it comes to religion.
Unlike Christianity and Islam, Judaism never thought to convert the world and never created an empire.
And here's the line.
All it sought was one tiny land, promised to the children of Israel by the creator of the universe, in whom Jews, Christians, and Muslims all believe.
That's all we want. Elaine, would you like to finish that up?
Rabbi Isaac was right. Rashi was right, quoted at the beginning of his Torah commentary. The Jewish people would be challenged on its right to the land by people who claim to worship the same God. The same God summons us today to the dignity of the human person, the sanctity of human life, and the imperative of peace. And the same God tells us that in the world of 82 Christian nations and 56 Muslim ones, there is room for one small Jewish state.
So that the end of the day is, if we want to be able to stand up to a world that calls for our destruction, or in the very least calls for our homelessness, we have to know what's our rights to the land. And what's our rights? The Torah. And this is something actually that the Rebbe pushed very much, the Israeli politicians, is that if you're going to go into any of these arguments, there is a counter argument. The Rebbe said to them that if you're going to tell the UN, or you're going to tell the other countries that Israel is ours because God gave it to us, there's nothing to argue about. You stumped them. There is nothing to argue. And that's also the answer about giving away land for peace, which we're not going to go into that discussion right now, but that also is, if Israel as a whole belongs to the Jewish people, it's not ours to give away. It's not ours to take from it and give to anyone else. Because number one, it belongs to us. Number two, it's God-given. It's a gift given from God to us. How do we have the right to say, thank God for the gift? I'm just going to give a little bit away. Can't do that.
Is Gaza what?
So, before I answer the question, is Gaza part of the land? Before I answer that question, I will say that there is another about land and security. So again, this is finish the topic about our ownership of Israel. There's something called security, and the security of any Jewish settlement, whether it's in Borough Park or whether it's in Israel, any location that Jewish people live, and allowing others to come there, even come there, could possibly tamper with the security of the Jewish people. Person has to desecrate Shabbos, has to go the furthest measures to protect it. There's actually a law in Shulchan Aruch that says that if it's Shabbat, Shabbos, we don't do anything, we don't carry, anything. If it's Shabbos and a nation that is on the border of a Jewish community, even if it's not Israel, comes to ask for, starts, making a rift, which it says that starts to discuss heaven, wheat, literally just something very minute, but starts to harass. It says on Shabbos to go out with weapons and protect that area. So whether an area is biblically part of Israel or not, at this point, is not really a discussion anymore. A lot, for example, a lot is not biblically Israel.
No, I know.
So
There's another question.
In
When up to the six of the day before and everything, and when we returned to Sinai to Egypt and everything, Gaza was part of Egypt, but Egypt refused it. What do we do with that?
again, we've shifted from here to a more security and political discussion, which I will just say again, the fact our ownership on the land of Israel is very clear. All the things that come after it, and giving away land for peace and all these things, are very, very strong indicators of weakness. You see, when Begin sat down with this guy Sadat from Egypt, the Rebbe called out, screamed by Fabrengens, campaigned against not to give away the Sinai. Forget about from a Jewish perspective, a political and safety perspective. And the Rebbe said, what are you giving it away for? You're not even giving for a piece of paper that they themselves don't respect. And so some people say, hey, you know what? They gave away the Sinai and Egypt. Okay, and what I'm saying is, and we've had quiet silence from Egypt since 78, which that's what people want to claim. Well, first of all, Syria, we've also had quiet from them, and we didn't give them an inch of land. Second of all, why not? Why do we have silence from them? Because they know if they're going to start up with us, it's not worth it. Second of all, is where do you think Gaza got all their weapons from? They got it from exactly. It didn't happen in a vacuum. They didn't. They got it all from. They came all from Egypt.
Now the Philadelphia border and that's the biggest problem now.
I think you alluded it to before when you were saying, well, we were the United States or something of that nature. Would the UN even involved?
Yeah.
The concessions of land, this and that, and
it's
a political game we sometimes have to play due to the nature of our size, due to the nature of power projection. If we were the States, no one would care. No one would care. But we're small, and it's easy to pick on, and so then sometimes we find.
But why are they picking on the Jewish state as opposed to any other state?
Because that's picking on Jews is the most trite thing in
So here's something very interesting.
Never
heard that.
What's the most repetitive thing in history is hate on Jews. It's the most old idea I've ever heard.
It's one of the oldest traditions in the world.
It really is.
So this course gives a very interesting insight for the reason why, and we're going to discuss in next class. That's the whole thing of where does anti-Semitism come from and where does it come from? But it's very much tied into the land of Israel, and without us even knowing it, it's a subconscious decision of people or the world at large of if you're all about spirituality, if Judaism is all about being Jewish and being holy and being whatever the ultimate Jew is in everyone's mind, then not only what right do you have to any land? You shouldn't care about land. Land should be, you should the least of your concern. Who cares about land? Live a higher spiritual life. Who cares about land?
Give me Mecca. Give me the Vatican.
But they don't claim to be spiritual. They don't claim to be the prized chosen nation. We do. So if we're the prized chosen nation and we're saying we have this direct connection with God, then seriously, what do you care about land for? Go get involved with important things. That's the claim. That is their subconscious claim. And this is our answer to that claim is you're getting it all wrong. Judaism is not about spiritual. Judaism is about translating it into this world.
It's about
translating it into action, bringing it into this world. That's right.
What did you say?
It's about bringing the spiritual into the physical world.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Ingrid, for joining.
We're both.
I hope you hear most of it.
We're both made of physical and.
It looks like your little furry friend also enjoyed.
Yes.
Listen, Katz is a pretty Jewish last name.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for joining L'chaim. I hope you can make it in person.
Good night.